They are wired by God to test. Way better to shape what they test. Hey friends, it's Pastor Ray. I just got back from a conference speaking in Puerto Rico, and while I was there, I had an incredible conversation with a whole bunch of parents, all of whom in some way or another said, they live in Puerto Rico, they're going, what in the world has happened to our kids? Okay, and I said, watch some videos, because there are 7 things happening to this generation of kids, 7 storms hitting every kid. And if parents don't know what the storms are, they can't protect them or counteract them, okay? And the 7 storms of this, number 1 is fear, which creates all kinds of emotional problems. Insecurity leads to really bad stuff. Second is premature adulthood. They've lost their childhood. They've lost innocence that goes with it. It's unnatural for kids. Third is spiritual deconstruction. Our whole world is trying to deconstruct people's faith. And these are at times things need to be built and constructed, not deconstructed. And then the most important thing is this: mainstream media and social media are number 4 and 5. That is massive impact. The number 1 shaper of values is media. Much of this stuff coming out of Hollywood, California. Okay, and we just did a thing on this. There is cultural chaos, and if you missed this, back up one. We have lost one thing. Kids have lost one thing in every generation since 1950. 7 straight generations of losing one thing after another that you have to be emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, relationally healthy, or build a future. Okay? And they've lost these things that are essential for long-term health and relational health. And that's led to this. That was cultural chaos. Now, this is storm number 7. And this is different than the other 6. The other 6 are outside influences, literally bombarding kids. This one is an internal thing, and here it is: overwhelming change. Not only has the entire world gone crazy and come unglued, but they're changing on the inside while everything else is changing on the outside, and they can't. It's almost like they're trying to play tennis on the deck of the Titanic, and they can't because it's moving and rocking so far, and they're afraid it's going to sink. That's what's going on. And so all I want to do is give you a mini adolescent development thing of why they're going through changes. And by the way, you need to know this, because if you're a parent or you just care about kids, okay, the way they act when they're 5 is different than the way they act with 15. There's 3 stages, and how you handle each stage is going to determine whether they're emotionally and spiritually healthy in each stage. So all I want to do is paint things for you, okay? Human development, according to Stephen Glenn, who's done the best thinking on this, happens in 3 stages. First of all, it's a time of discovery, from birth to about age 5. If you're writing this down, jot it down. Birth to about 5 or 6 or so, it's a time of discovery. Matter of fact, a lot of you watch this, you have kids this age, or you had kids this age, and what were remember that? They're discovering fingers, toes, mom, dad. I mean, they're discovering all this stuff. I mean, think about it a second. You're holding an infant that's 3 months old. That kid, 4.5 years later, is going to school, okay? Think about all the stuff they discovered. It's a time of, say it with, discovery, okay? That then is followed by a second stage. At about age 6 or 9 or 10, they go from discovery to the second phase of human development, and that's testing, okay? And they start testing. Now, the question is, what are they testing? They're testing what they've previously discovered. So they spend about 5 years in discovery and about 3 to 4 years testing that stuff. Now, what do they test? They test what they've discovered. And our kids, man, they tested everything. What happens if I ride the bike into the pool? Okay? What happens if, what if I take the fork and put it in the wall sprocket? What happens if, they're at, the kids in that age, they're at the hospital all the time because they've broken an arm, a finger, or a leg because they're testing, okay? I remember when I was that age, I tested what would happen if we hooked 4 M80s together, which was about a stick of dynamite, lit it on fire, put a rock to it, lit it on fire, and threw it over the fence in my neighbor's pool. I actually did this. 10 years old, you're testing. What will happen? What happened was this. It was almost like an earthquake. We felt the earth move. There was a 1 second delay, and then water blew all over the backyard. Water from their pool blew into our pool. We're literally going, oh man, we cracked the pool. Luckily went over and the water displacement handled it. But I literally went, I'm going to be grounded until I'm 50 years old if I'm not careful there. They're a time of discovery. That leads to a time of testing. And then about age 10 to 12, you can kick back. It is the best season. They draw conclusions. 10 years old, 11 years old. Stephen Glenn says this, the happiest people in the world are all 10 years old. They're 11 years old. It's Friday night. They don't have a date. They don't care. They're 10 years old, okay? They can be at home with parents on Friday night. They don't care. They're 10 years old. They're happy little campers. I mean, I remember when our kids, one of my kids, I remember when our kids were 10, 11 years old, I was like, is there a pill I can give that just keeps them right in this moment? They're that great. They still think dad's cool, mom's amazing. I mean, all of this stuff. It's this wonderful season, and you're going, they've arrived to full childhood. This is awesome. And then one tragic thing happens. Puberty hits and wipes the entire thing out. Now, here's what happens. They come swinging in to adolescence on the trapeze of childhood. Puberty hits, whammo, they let that trapeze go. Can they grab the next trapeze yet? No. Okay, so what's a good definition of a teenager? A good definition of adolescent is this: somebody who's let go of this trapeze, can't grab the next one yet for full adulthood, so they have nothing to grab. Their feet are firmly planted in midair, so what do they usually grab? Each other, and they all go downhill together, okay? And so what happens, they actually go through the same 3 stages to get to authentic adulthood that they had to get to full childhood. So they go back through discovery, testing, and conclusion. So discovery, it's about age 13 to 15 or so, and it's a time of discovery. Okay? That's generally the junior high or middle school years. That's why they're so insecure. They're like, their body changes. They're discovering, what do you think of me? So kids are going to the school and they're going, what do you think of me? What do you think? They're up, down, up, down. They got a boyfriend, the girl, she'll have a boyfriend at breakfast, break up by lunch, new one by dinner. Okay? Why? They're in a time of discovery. They're massively insecure. That's why no adult I know wants to go back to junior high. Okay? Now, that's a time of discovery. Then what happens is, and parents don't like this stage, they go from discovery to a time of testing. And that's generally, to the testing phases is when they're going, I'm going to test, it's usually age 14 or 15 to about 17 or 18 or 80, whatever it is, but they go through a time. Now, what are they testing? Okay, here's what they're testing. Everything, rules, limits. You know, dad says, be home at midnight. Kid comes home Tuesday, just to test what's going to happen. And they go through this testing phase. I'm going to come back to testing in a second because what they test is massive. Okay, and then what happens is this: about age 18 or so, and it can happen earlier or it can happen way later, they go into the third and final phase. They draw conclusions and they become a settled, healthy adult. Now, why is this a big deal? It's a big deal for a couple of reasons. Number one is this: the teenage years are a time of transition, not a time of arrival. They're a time of transition, not a time of arrival. And so when they're in testing or whatever it is, if you know that, parents, if you know the stage they're in, you know how to respond because you respond to testing differently than when you respond to discovery. So I'll give you an example of that. I was a youth pastor years ago, and we had a woman in our church, really pretty high octane emotions, reminded me actually of Tammy Faye Baker, looked a bit like her, sort of had the emotional release, that kind of thing. And she came into my office one day, made an appointment, came into my office, sat down, and she just started sobbing. And I said, what's up? And she said, my son came home. I knew her son, great kid, high school sophomore, in our leadership team. I'm discipling this kid. She said, my son came home and said, I don't believe in Jesus anymore. And then started sobbing and said, he's going to hell. And I said, what, your son came home and said he doesn't believe in Jesus anymore? Yes, he's going to hell. And I said, your son actually came home and told you that? Like, honest with you? She said, yes, he's going to hell. And I said, the fact that your son came home and said that, that's great. And then she said something about my eternal destination. And I drew this for her on a piece of paper. And I said, your son has not lost his faith. I know him. We talk about this stuff all the time. He is in our discipleship group. He is a great kid. I love him. I like to multiply this kid. He has not lost his faith. And if you knew this stuff, what you would know is this: he hasn't lost his faith. What's he doing? He is testing you. He's in testing. He's testing. Can I say anything I want at home? Can I push mom's button and make her explode? When you know the phase somebody's in, you cannot overreact, and you can also understand and minister to them during the thing. So when they're in a time of discovery, put them in all kinds of places where they can discover great things. Man, when our kids hit junior high, they're at church 24/7 because they're sucking in information, and I wanted them to have as much access as God. The minute they hit high school, I'll give you one more example of this and kind of wrap it up. The response of the church to these three phases, and every single parent, has got to be spot on. When they're in discovery, give them great things to discover. Spend a ton of time with them. When they're in conclusions, celebrate that with them and build a friendship with them, okay? Lower your authority and be more of a friend. However, when they're in testing, you know what's sad is? God has wired teenagers to test. Matter of fact, God has wired 8 years old to test, okay? Which means do fun stuff with your kids. Let them learn to do stuff when they're 6 to 9. And then here's the problem. The church's response to teenagers when they're in the test has been to say, don't test. We're going to put you in a classroom. We're going to bore you to death telling you not to test. Don't test sex. Don't test drugs. Don't test alcohol. Don't test whatever it is. By the way, those are all good things to not test. The problem is this. They are wired by God to test. Way better to shape what they test. Okay, which means they're going to test, meet that need by having them test serving and test their faith and haul them on a mission trip and all of that kind of stuff. I'll give you a perfect example of that. I become a youth pastor in one of the wealthiest counties in the world, a place called Marin County. I walk in and I realize I am looking at the first group of high school kids that I've ever met that is 100% bored to death. Okay. I walk in and these kids are wired to test. Nobody's ever given a chance. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff on weekends. And I literally went, I'm going to get them into missions and service if it kills me because they're into testing. It took 6 months. And I'm literally here's my pitch. I'm going, hey, what do you do during Easter? And I don't let them answer because this Easter, we're going to Mexico. We're going to work with the poor. You're going to build houses. I'm taking you into prisons in Mexico and you'll be helping prisoners in there. And I give them this whole pitch. And at the end of this pitch, I go, who's going with me? And they're like, no. It took 6 months of motivating, challenging, one-on-one with people, actually lying to them in Jesus' name. I'm saying to them stuff like, hey, they're coming up to me going, man, we know we should go. We ski together during Easter. It's a tradition. I'm saying stuff like, bring your skis. The skiing in Mexico in April is off the hook. Okay, so it arrives. 38 of them, 38 teenagers, high school kids, are with me. We get them into Mexico, and they've never recovered. The first thing they see are 4 Mexican national friends laying this friend of theirs down by the side of the road. No arms, no legs, evidently 4 amputation. And that gets at these rich kids. And they're looking at me going, what happened? And I'm saying, I don't know. Maybe his parents didn't have enough money to get medical help in time. And that got at him. And then literally people living in cardboard shacks, multiple families, that got at them. And moms with sick kids, ribs sticking out. They couldn't afford $10 to get them some medical help. That got out. But the big shocker was this. We were supposed to go down, headquarter with the church, team up with this church, worship with their building, and then we're going to team up with that church and serve their community, build homes, all this kind of stuff. And Sunday, we headquarter on Saturday, they build tents. They're out of their element totally. They're in testing zone for good stuff. And then we go to our church, we pull up and we realize, something's terribly wrong. The church is burned, crashed in, windows are all gone, roof is, and now I have 38 teenagers looking at me going, way to go, Ray, until I hear noise from the inside of the building. And I go, wait here. I sneak over to this burned out church. I look in the back window, and here's what I see. A young, tough-looking Mexican national pastor is preaching his heart out to 9 very discouraged-looking people. And now I'm going, there's a church service going on. They don't know we're coming. What should I do? So I go, we drove 1,000 miles, man, and this is scary, so let's take these kids to church. So I go, come on over. It had to be a major shock to this pastor. This is the middle of nowhere, Mexico, and all of a sudden, 38 kids from Marin County file in the back of this guy's church. He's so shocked, he stops his sermon. I started laughing. I thought, I bet he thinks Visitor Sunday's working. He stops his sermon and he says, ¿Qué pasa? Which translated means, what are you yuppies doing here? And I let the high school kids do everything. turned to this kid named Greg, and in Spanglish, he said, we're Christians. We're from the U.S. We're here to help and serve in any way we can. It got silent, and you could feel the tension rise. Our kids are now starting to get afraid. This guy's a young, tough-looking guy, and he gets really intense, the guy that was the pastor or the young pastor, and I'm thinking, he's going to throw us out. I have no idea what's going to happen in this town. And our kids start getting scared. A couple of our girls start crying, and then after he gets it together, he looks at our kids and says, and he found out later there's a gang in the village. He said they burned our church down 6 months ago. And he looks right at these 38 kids who are doing something as high school kids they never dreamt they'd be. I'm representing Jesus in a foreign country. I'm building homes. And he looks right at him and says, and for 6 months, we've been praying that God would send help to rebuild our little church, but we'd given up any hope help would ever arrive. And the tension in the room is off the charts. And he's glaring at us. Our kids are looking at him. And then every youth group's got a big mouth kid. And this kid goes, he blurts this out, not a humble kid. He goes, hey, we're an answer to prayer. You know what it is? They were. Well, back home, they just caused prayer. Down there, they were walking around high-fiving each other going, answer to prayer. One of these guys goes, hey, why don't they have a roof? I go, it burned down. He goes, why don't we pay for it? I said, okay, go for it. They whip a sombrero off, take an offering, and 2 days later, all of these high school guys and girls are on the roof with villagers, and it took 2 days, and they rebuilt the entire church, brand new roof on it, all these high school kids, okay? But didn't do any good because our high school students are working with kids, our high school students are preaching the sermons, our high school kids are leading the worship at night, our high school students are showing the Jesus movie on the wall. So many villagers started coming to the church for the evening service that our high school kids were running that they literally had to move out of the church and do it outside because they couldn't fit the whole crowd into the church building. Well, our kids get back to school, and their friends are like, man, where'd you go? Vail? Aspen Tile? No, where'd you go? Mexico. What'd you do? Were you to ski? No, you can't ski in Mexico. They said, an hour later, they're going, I built a church. I'm a hero. All this kind of stuff. And you know what's interesting is? They were like, I'm going to answer to prayer. As long as I live, I will never forget being with a group of 38 apathetic, bored, out of their mind church brat kids, totally transformed because one youth group shaped what they tested. Okay? These things are really important. And knowing what to do during discovery, knowing what to do when they're in the testing phase, and knowing how to help them get to the conclusion phase is massive. That's what the whole next session about. We've just given you 7 storms. Now we're going after 7 strategies to raise kids who defy the odds. So looking forward to phase 2 on this thing. We'll be right back at you with it soon. Thanks.